So something else that we want to work into the same time frame, right? We're going to talk about the regrading in Seattle. So if you're not familiar with this, um, between 1897, now the years are really vague. Every source has a bit of a different time frame for this. So I'm just going to kind of generalize what I think is probably the more appropriate time frames. But I would say 1900 through 1909. So in between the time frame that they're building this exposition, which again, if you look at how many people it would take to build this, the labor involved, the time frames, and then at the same time, they're doing the regrading of Seattle. So hopefully you guys can see this picture. I don't know if I can make this bigger. That'll help. Perfect. All right. Look at this. Look at this image, you guys. And I do a horrible job of looking at the chat, so I'm going to try and do better. So I apologize. But what do you guys see here? And I hope that I know it's a bad image for me too. It's 120 years old image, but you can see some ghetto train tracks with a steam train here at the bottom. You can see a 15, 12. I don't know how far it goes down, but a rather large building that it's either new construction or they're renovating. And then you see about, oh, I don't know, 8 stories of a hillside here and mounds, mud flood, a lot of dirt, a lot of antennas. Yeah, so the antennas I think are new construction or remodeling. It's hard to know for sure. You got the older style antennas here in the background, but yeah. So we're gonna get into this. This is gonna be a big part of what we talk about today because it's probably one of the craziest examples of repopulating, repurposing, digging out that you're gonna see. Now, the narrative with this is they use the term regrading. Well, you can use that term and follow it across the late 1800s and early 1900s all across America, and they're digging out cities. What they're saying is they're regrading. They're taking the soil, making a level area so it's more suitable for building and for people and transportation. But that all is insanely ridiculous. The amount of labor they invested in this, and it went on for years and years. Um, in less than 10 years, they moved upwards of 45, 50 million tons of dirt. And they were finding all kinds of stuff inside these big hills. They were regularly finding bodies of Indians, again, quote, Indians, um, not mounds like we're used to in the Mississippi Valley, but far more rudely constructed, often folded up and put in wooden boxes, but still some form of burial. And just like um, hydro mining, using giant water jets, that's what they were doing here for the most part. But I'm just going to read this caption here, and we'll keep going farther here into some of these pictures, and it's gonna blow your mind if you're not familiar with the regrading in Seattle. Um, it's happened in dozens of cities across America, and it's not very well known. But yeah, so the topography of Seattle was radically altered by a series of regrades. It was up to 10 from what I've been able to find, up to 10 of these different regrades going on, some overlapping times, some at completely different times. In the city's first century of urban development. Now, when you look at Seattle in the mid late 1800s, it's a up and coming town, but it's small, 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 small. And the yeah, so just keep that in mind as we start looking at more of these pictures. The heart of Seattle, largest city in the state of Washington, is on an isthmus between the city's chief harbor, the saltwater Elliott Bay, an inlet of the Puget Sound, and the freshwater of Lake Washington. Capitol Hill, First Hill, Beacon Hill collectively constitute a ridge along this isthmus. Now, something that I've mentioned with Longo and something that I've talked about with Grimo before in the past is Seattle was a city of seven hills. So just like Rome, just like Tampa Bay, Florida, just like Rome, Georgia, just like Cincinnati, there are dozens of cities that were built on seven hills. Now, I think this regrading of Seattle was the destruction of these seven hills. In addition, at the time the city was founded, the steep Denny Hill, now it's many hills, it's not one hill, it's seven hills. And they're talking about these three are the biggest, largest ones that stand out, and they're all leveled to the ground. Um, some of the hills were 10 stories. So just incredible. Like I already mentioned, 50 million tons. Known as Belltown and Denny Regrade. When European settlers first came to Seattle in the early 1850s, the tides of Elliott Bay lapped at the base of Beacon Hill. The original location of the settlement that became Seattle, today's Pioneer Square, was a low-lying island. A series of regrades leveled paths for roads, demolished Denny Hill, and turned much of Jackson Hill, a remnant of which remains along Main Street, into a near canyon between First and Beacon Hills. The roughly 50 million short tons of earth from these so it's 60. So from what I understood, it was seven hills that were taken, and then there were three segments of Denny Hill. So, but 60. So maybe that's just 60 individual projects, but over the same amount of area. Provided landfill for the city's waterfront and the industrial commercial neighborhood now known as Sodo, and built Harbor Island, at the time the largest man-made island in the world. So we'll take a look at Harbor Island really quick. Nothing crazy, just a huge industry, um, but still very interesting. Seattle's first 58 regrades consisted largely of cutting the tops off high places and dumping the dirt into low places and onto the beach. The most dramatic result of this was along the former beach, filling the land that constitutes today's central waterfront. Today's Western Avenue and Alaska Way lie on this landfill. These informal regrades came to an end around 1900. Later regrades typically required changes to areas that had already undergone some development. So, like I had mentioned, um, so in 1900, they had just been taking the tops off the hills. Now, from 1900 till 1909, I believe, is when they started some of these really crazy ones. And I'm just going to go show some pictures here. Here's a before and after. You can see one of these really amazing buildings here, um, on top of the hill. And you'll find so many anomalies in these pictures where you can see obviously stone um, foundations. This building has a ton of it. There's a lot of wood in Seattle, but there's a lot of stone. In any of the stone buildings, as hopefully we'll see better quality images as we go along here. I have a few on my feed, but Twitter could be pretty annoying to pull pictures from. Um, but yeah, I mean, this doesn't even do it justice. I mean, you saw in that first picture I showed, just to give an example. But there are places where it was 10 stories or more of dirt. Um, and here's a great picture. So the majority of it was done with water. Um, yeah, Morris style building. There's a lot of amazing older buildings in Seattle, and they're all gone pretty much. There's a few that are left. We'll get into Tacoma here a little bit. Tacoma has one of my favorite buildings, and I was lucky enough to go there about a decade ago. It's still around. It's a school, of course. But yeah, look at the perspective here. Hopefully, you guys can see just what we're dealing with. Now, the narrative in some of these pictures is that these houses, okay, this is what they're saying. Now remember, this is steam bucket, horses, horses, and um, in places like this where they don't, because they don't have trains all around all these hills. So most of this is being washed into an area or carried away with a horse and buggy. Now the narrative is that this house was on top of this hill, and that as they washed it away, they slowly lowered it down, keeping it together. Now, what kind of nonsense is that? We're dealing with a city that's barely getting its feet off the ground. It barely has infrastructure. Um, it barely has paved roads. I mean, there's like 7 or 8 paved roads in Seattle in this time frame. Um, and this is the kind of thing they're doing. And remember, the time frame for the exposition is in the final 4 years of this, which is when they're really doing the most work, it seems. But that this will just give you perspective. I mean, we're dealing with 6 stories, maybe more. Um, yeah, and again, thanks everyone for being here. I'm doing my best to keep up with chat too, so we can kind of tie in any questions or anything. But I'm skipping forward on the wiki here just to show some of the pictures that really give a good perspective. Um, uh, uh, the crappy picture of the school, but it's completely all stone foundation, stone building, and they demolished it. So they demolished this school, this stone building school, but they lowered this house down from 80 feet up to keep it together. Hey Bernie, thanks for being here. And how does that make any sense? Well, the reality is that this foundation probably was 3, 4, 5 stories deep, and that's part of what we're trying to get rid of here. And I think we're gonna hop into. Um, let's just hop into here real quick and do. Because there's a lot more pictures, and I want to get you guys some better pictures here. Okay, this is what they're telling us they're doing. This is the narrative they're saying here. Okay, that they're lowering houses down, like that first picture I showed you. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. And yeah, I mean, look at this. Just another house leaning at a weird angle. Guys with huge hydraulic hoses. Now, when we get into my California Anomalous America episode, we're going to really get into hydraulic mining a lot, and it's going to blow your mind, the stuff they were finding in the mountains. It seems that the west coast of America was not only covered in hundreds of feet of lava, which Seattle, Tacoma, Eastern Washington, a huge chunk of Oregon, and a huge chunk of California are buried under 300, 400, 500 feet of lava. And then on top of that, they're covered in mud. So was this mud flood? Did it rain from the sky? Was it a liquefaction event? I tended to lean away from the liquefaction event because the lava flows and the lava fields, they don't help the case for that. So where did it come from? Could it have been a wave? Now for every 10 feet of tidal surge. Again, I'm going to get this number wrong, but it's only like a few inches of debris that's left, silt, and so to leave behind 100 feet of mud, it would either need to be a giant wave or mud was raining from the sky. I don't really know what it is. Um, I'm sure there are things called mud volcanoes, and I would say maybe that's partially to blame, but I don't know um, if that's the case for all of these. And again, I live right on the Ring of Fire, all the way from the Yukon down through BC, Washington, Oregon, California. It's all volcanic ranges. I live right under a Mount Hood. Um, but yeah, so I think that plays a role, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I just want to go over some of these images because um, when I first found out about this, and shout out to anyone from Stolen History or knows Stolen History, years and years and years and years ago, that was like, before any of this stuff was really on YouTube. Stolen History was the absolute jam. And they were talking about this on Stolen History. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe it was 2000. Maybe it was 2019. Um, but I mean, just unbelievable, really. We're the images. I could show images all day, but I think it's really important for people to see these um, because it's just absolutely insane. We're gonna look for a few more of my favorites. Here's a good one. Just insane. I mean, houses up on these hills, and the narrative is that this whole hill gets destroyed. This whole hill's gone. So these houses all got lowered down, as I showed you. That's what the narrative is. As the hill went away, they lowered the house down. I mean, that just seems so stupid to me. Um, Obviously, I think there was a lot going on in the 1800s, and the West Coast um, was was the last frontier, so called. Um, because the manpower and getting again the orphan train stuff connects a lot of dots here when you realize a lot of the early industry on the West Coast. The gold rush was a repopulation tactic. When you look at the populations and how they were obviously forcibly moving people. They had been using slave labor in California for over 100 years. Chinese, Japanese, um, people from South America, people from the Gulf, people from Cuba. Um, but that wasn't cutting it. And the gold rush was a repopulation tactic, 100%. And this is exactly what they were doing in California. But instead of it being about regrading a city to make it more livable, they were looking for gold, right? Just the same purposes, but new narrative. And yeah, these images I just can't stop looking at them. I haven't looked at them in a few years. So when I was getting ready for this episode, I was just like, man, I just couldn't believe, like pictures like this. What came first, the chicken or the egg? What do you guys think? You know, like what does this look like to you? And you can find this in cities all over. They had stuff like this in Portland, in my birth city. I live outside of Portland, but I was born in Portland. And all the cities are mud flooded there. I think I've talked about it before. I'm not sure on what episode it was, but when I was in middle school, they still had tours, and we went into the Portland Underground, and it was 3 or 4 stories, all brickwork, stonework, um, that went on and on and on, the whole city. And you find pictures like this in Portland. You find pictures like this in cities in California, cities in Nevada, um, west of the Mississippi, or east of the Mississippi. I'm sorry. There were towns in Missouri. There were towns in Kentucky. There were towns in. I'm just going off the top of my head. I'm sure there were so many, but that are easily you can find proof of where there are. There, the narrative is that they're. The what came first, and they're showing. What is this? 2, 3 stories of mud here between this building, and yeah, just that's a drawing, but you get the idea here. I mean, it just seems like a war zone to me. These images are so small. There's a few more good ones I wanted to show, like this one here. Here's that school I was talking about. And you'll find a lot of these old stone buildings that are obviously far older than we're told are schools, which is weird. It's very weird. In Portland, there's a ton. We'll go over that next week. But here's that building. My opinion is they got to this part and they're like, well, I mean, this thing's too big to lower down, which I still don't believe that's what's really happening. But I would imagine as they went deeper and deeper, the building just kept going. And you can have a 2-story stone school become a 5-story stone school. That just wouldn't fit the narrative. Here's the picture I wanted to show. Now, does this make sense? You're saying that they washed all this away? Now it's either they lowered this building down or this building was built, it's just there's the school in the background so you get the perspective again, you know, just ridiculous. Just insane. And again, they were finding human bones all in this stuff. Human bones. Sometimes they were in full um, coffins. And this is how they're doing this. Like you see train tracks every once in a while, but most of this is steam shovel and horse and buggy. Okay. Look at that building in the background. So they're moving 50 million tons of earth with horse and buggy, steam shovel, and you have buildings like this in the background. I mean, what is going on? Here's the trains, but again, the trains were in only very specific locations. Most of it was horse and buggy. Now, why that's fresh in your mind, we'll come back and show a few more pictures. Oh, here's a good one. Sorry for the small pictures. I had a bunch that I've already presented and shared, but my stuff on Twitter can be a little buggy. Um, oh, that's right. I did it with. Here we go. So we're going to. I want to swap over, and we're going to go into some articles now, and keep those pictures that I showed you fresh in your mind. Let's just do full screen. No, that doesn't work. Okay. Okay, we're going to just jump ahead and I'll come back to some of these. I just wanted to read a specific one that'll give you kind of an idea. Here we go. Discovery at Tacoma, Washington, 1907. So this is right in that time frame when they're digging out. They're doing the regrade, and they're building the exposition. Okay, same time frame. Discovery at Tacoma. Supposed tide flats found 1,000 feet below the surface. Tacoma, December 16th. The 1,000-foot deep well that the city is boring at South Tacoma promises to reveal much of the strata of this peculiar formation of the country before the boring ceases. The contractors, however, were not expecting a formation that they have just run into of something very much akin to the marshy mud and silt found on the tide flats in front of Tacoma. The formation is many feet in thickness and contains much decayed vegetable matter, showing that in some bygone age there was a general shifting of the surface strata of the Earth's crust here, in which hundreds of feet of gravel were piled on top of growing, exuberant vegetation. The decayed plant life appears to have been much akin to a tropic vegetation, and with the tide mud in which it is congealed, forms a substance much like soft rubber. The auger is making fast time through the formation. So they're digging a deep well. 1,000 feet down, they find another beach. Hundreds of feet of gravel built on top of another beach where tropical vegetation